Welcome to Leadership and the Tarot. My name's Nicole. I'll be your guide on this journey. I'm so glad you've joined us. Let's jump in. All right, welcome back, friends. So glad you are here this week. And we're going to do something a little bit different that I have not done yet. We are actually going to do 2 weeks, 2 different cards, 2 different books pulled together for one video, for one shared meaning, one shared invitation. And I wasn't planning on doing this. I'd had one card pulled and a book chosen, and then the next week's card came before I filmed the video, and they just blended in so nicely and built off of each other that it felt like the right thing to do was to actually make these 2 weeks come together. So let's go ahead and look at the cards and the books that I was reading that were inspired by those 2 cards. So the first card for the first week that was pulled was the 3 of Cups. And for that card, I chose the Art of Gathering. So we'll just look quickly at what the 3 of Cups is. Again, the cups, as we've talked about before, is about our emotions. And we see 3 beings gathered together, what looks to be in celebration, fruits and vegetables, representing abundance and coming together to celebrate. So that was that card, and the book I chose was The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And that book is all about how we create more intentional gatherings, really understanding why we gather in the first place and the responsibilities of what it means to gather well. And it is full of sort of paradoxes in itself, and knowing that there are things and ideas that will work for one gathering, but then won't work for another gathering. So what I like about it is you're reading and you have these ideas, but then you read another part and you're like, wait a second, that seems like it's in contrast to the last idea. And that's exactly what I think brings the book so much value, is that it is full of inspiration, but it is also full of thoughtfulness, and saying one type of gathering will not fit every single occasion, and being really mindful and having some ideas and some tools to help you build really intentional gatherings. So that was the first week, the 3 of Cups, The Art of Gathering. This most recent week, the card that was pulled was Temperance, and Temperance is a major arcana, which are our lessons for life, these big life lessons that we will continue coming into. So we have an angel here, 1 foot on the ground, staying grounded, 1 foot in the water, being in flow, pouring back and forth, finding balance, Temperance. And the book that I chose for Temperance is Gracious Space. And Gracious Space is a very short manual on the concept of what gracious space is, and the idea of how do you create gracious space in groups, and gracious space being this concept of bringing in diverse perspectives and making learning very public. So how do we create spaces where there are many perspectives, and that those perspectives are valued, and that they're valued in that we are making an intentional choice to learn from one another and with one another. So what do these 2 books and these 2 cards invite us into this week? Well, I am bringing this to connect it all to leadership, is around having more meaningful meetings. In business, in work, we spend a lot of time in meetings, both digitally and in person. And I don't know if I've ever met a person who have said, we have really figured out how to do every single meeting. Maybe there are people who have found a few good meetings and they're like, yeah, there's something about this meeting, there's something about this gathering that is that's meaningful, that's really impacting, and we're really moving spaces. But that is not true for all of the meetings that I'm in. And then there are definitely people who have said, I have not been to one good meeting. I am really struggling to find meetings where I feel like I am a valued contributor and where I feel like I'm getting something out of it, and we are mutually moving towards some sort of shared value of why we're meeting. So I think meeting hygiene and meeting culture as leaders should be one of our most important priorities, because it is in these spaces where we are able to practice many of the things that we've been talking about on this channel. And we're talking about emotional intelligence, and we're talking about pausing and being responsive rather than being reactive, where we can really prioritize what is our vision, what are our values, what should be our priority, where should we be putting our energy, rather than trying to focus on everything. So how do we have more intentional meetings, and what do these cards have to teach us? So first we'll start with the Three of Cups, and the Three of Cups is about intentionally bringing people together to celebrate and to honor each individual person's gifts. And I think this is really important, because how often have you been in a meeting where you felt like your participation was either not important, and you were just there to check a box, or you weren't even sure what you were supposed to do, so you just started holding whatever role. You started making comments about whatever. And that when we intentionally create meetings where each individual's gifts are at the center of their participation, and they know how to be able to bring those gifts, and that then we are actually soliciting their gifts throughout the process, we're going to have much better meetings. So how do we do this? Well, one thing is really being clear about what is the purpose of our meeting. And that is a huge lesson, a takeaway from the art of gathering, is why are you gathering in the first place? Before you even start planning anything, before you start those checklists, and we could talk about meetings in the very formal sense of like the meetings that we're having, but we could also talk about when we're having meetings, collaborations across other organizations, or we can even talk about when we're having our events, our fundraising events. Are we starting with the purpose, a really clear, inspiring purpose, or are we going straight to the checklist things of, do I have an agenda? Check. Do I have the time set? Check. Do I have the venue booked? Check. Do we have the guest list that we're going to be sending out to? And we focus on those to-dos. That is what our event, or that is what our gathering, that is what our meeting will become about, rather than why we've come together. So the first thing we need to do is, why are we gathering? What makes this unique to any other gathering or meeting that is happening? And because we have that clear purpose, now we know who to invite and what gifts they can bring into that space to make sure that we can meet that purpose. So yes, the Three of Cups says, what is the purpose of your gathering? And then make sure that people know how to show up into that space and that they are feeling honored. Another thing that you can do when you're thinking about inviting people in and making sure that they are participating, that they are contributors, is, do you have protocols? Do you have processes that support people's participation, provocations, really very intentional ways in which people can participate? And the thing about protocols and facilitation processes is that they do come with rules and they do come with roles. And that may seem limiting at first. But when we're talking about things like equity, and we want to make sure that multiple voices are heard, having something with rules and roles can help us make sure that we are actually attending to that, and that people with more power or louder voices aren't taking up the entire space. Because often, if that's how we've been raised, or the culture that we've been in, or we've been rewarded for taking up space with our voices, we will unintentionally keep holding that space for ourselves. And we won't necessarily make space for others to participate. So what a facilitated protocol can do, or a process, is it can make sure that there is space for every voice. And that doesn't mean that everyone gets the same airtime either. I think that's really important to note. That's equality. Equality means everyone gets the same. That's not what we need in meetings. What we need is equity. And that means that everyone gets what they need in order to move us towards a more just and shared purpose. So it's possible that the person who holds the most power, and often is the most outspoken, needs the least time to speak in the meeting, and should be practicing more listening skills. And the people with less power, and whose voices tend to be marginalized, might need more time to speak. So all of that to say is, how are we making sure that our meetings are intentionally planned so that each of the participants can have a chance to share their gifts and contribute to what's happening in the meeting space? So again, those two things that I'll really recommend is, one, what is your purpose for your meeting? And the second one is using protocols and processes to make sure that people know how to participate and know how to show up in the meeting. And I think those are great for any kind of meetings, whether that's a 30-minute meeting or that's a 4-hour meeting. These types of protocols and invitations and provocations can be very, very meaningful into shaping purposeful dialogue. And that moves us into temperance and gracious space. Temperance is a card that invites us into keeping our calm and finding balance despite the circumstance. In particular, when things are stressful and a bit chaotic, how can we find that calm, that equanimity, that ability to hold multiple perspectives? And again, we've talked about this before, and I'm going to share it here again, just in case you haven't seen those videos. But when we're talking about learning how to cultivate our calm, developing our EQ, we are doing this in spaces that aren't high stakes. So we are making sure that we have time to practice the development of our emotional intelligence. We are creating cultures where people can move more slowly. We are really cultivating spaces that are rooted around thoughtfulness and responsiveness, and saying, hey, I'm not going to give you an answer to that right now. I'd like to step away and really think about a thoughtful response. We are cultivating this in all of the work that we're doing and the way that we show up, because we can't just expect people to show up in meetings with the temperance card, with this calm, if everything else in our workplace is already on fire and feels like we're just running from one thing to the next, putting out fires all day. So, temperance. How do we come to our calm, and how does that relate to our meetings? Well, I think, as we were talking about, a meeting can be a great place to actually practice this calmness and this stillness. There can be enough parameters around a meeting, again, going back to the protocol idea, where we can build in a practice of thoughtful, slow responses, creating pauses between people speaking. We, as the facilitators, as the leaders of these meetings, can actually create a tone without even having to put a rule in sometimes. If we ourselves are showing up, asking thoughtful questions, providing pause before we answer, we are setting a tone for how people may show up in the meeting. So, meetings can be a great place to practice this calmness and this stillness and this responsiveness. so that this way of being can really permeate out beyond just these spaces. They can show up in how our people are doing their work, and they can really start to impact our relationships. And so the gracious space comes in, which I think is really important, because so in addition to meetings be a great place where we can practice these things, there are times when a meeting is actually going to be high stakes. And we're going to be pulling people together, and we're going to be pulling in diverse perspectives in a way so everyone can contribute. And we're going to need to make sure that that space is a place where multiple perspectives can be held and considered. And we are going to be thinking about, okay, well, what do I need to do as the facilitator to set some ground rules or some cultural norms, if you will, so that when people speak, they feel safe to speak their truth, and that we can actually create a space for conflict that is productive. And that when people start to share dissenting views, we can have grace for one another. We can actually learn from one another. And I'm not going to go into all those things, but Gracious Space can be a beautiful book if you're wondering, how do I create a gracious community? One, because it gives you a few things of what Gracious Space is, but also gives resources for other ideas. And I would also recommend The Art of Gathering. And in The Art of Gathering, the author does finish with saying it's important to have conflict. We need to have conflict-positive spaces. So, how are we making sure that it's okay to disagree? But that doesn't mean we have to, lose it, get angry, be outraged every time there's a disagreement. And that has so much to do with the leader. That has so much to do with how you are creating your meetings. And if you are creating meetings where it is not a container where people can do that, there's a lot. I don't think I need to tell all the outcomes of what happens from that. But a few are things like people not being able to really express their feelings and actually becoming violent in meetings. Maybe not physically violent, but verbally violent. Things where people aren't feeling heard, and so they stop showing up. Meaning they might be showing up to the meetings physically, but are they showing up and bringing them their full selves? And then a third one that I often see is named in so many leaderships books is the conversation, the meeting after the meeting, where people then go and find spaces where they do feel like they can share what they needed to say. Or maybe they're not even sharing what they needed to say. They're feeling so harmed and hurt in that meeting that the meeting after the meeting is just a place to express all the things, all the hurt that they feel, and start to create sort of this culture of gossip or hurt, and knowing that is not about them. That is that the culture of the meeting has created that space. And so if you don't like those things where people are becoming violent, where people are just showing up but not actually bringing them their full selves, or that are going and starting gossip afterwards, then you need to do a better job of planning your meetings. And that is on you as the leader. It is on all of us to say, creating meetings, deciding to hold a meeting is a very, very important responsibility. It is not something that should be haphazardly thrown together or not even thought about at all, but it's just something we put on our calendars. So how do we avoid that? How do we avoid falling into the trap of just having bad meetings? And I don't like to use the word bad because it's such a qualifier, but it feels like bad meetings. It feels like these meetings that are just happening just to happen. So how do we stop that? Well, one is maybe do an audit of your meetings. What are the meetings that you're having? And then start with the meetings that you're in charge of hosting. And in those meetings, think about do I have a purpose for this meeting? Do people know the purpose? Have I explicitly shared what the purpose of this meeting is? If I don't know the purpose of this meeting, do I need to have it? And if I can say, actually, I don't think this is a purposeful meeting, maybe take that meeting away until you can figure out a purposeful way to gather people again around that topic. Or maybe it's not even what it says is, wait, this actually isn't a gathering at all. I think it's, being really open to controlling the things that you have control over. Now, it's possible that you'll look at your collection of meetings and you'll say, well, I'm actually not the host of any of these meetings. I haven't decided to bring these people together at all. For those meetings, that might be an interesting space for you to sit in. What is my unique gift that I bring into this space that I would like to make sure is captured and that there is space for? And I would like to articulate that to the host to make sure that I know, and they know what it is I hope to bring into this space. It's also inviting people who, if you have a close relationship with them and they are the host, is to ask them, what is the purpose of this meeting? Do we know why we're coming together? So that's the first thing. Do an audit of your meetings. What's happening on your calendar? How can you change the things that you have the power to change? And then how can you influence others and invite others into this same reflective process? I would say the second thing is, if you have recurring meetings on your schedule, consider putting sort of cycles, and we've talked about this before, cycles on your meetings. So, let's say we're going to meet for 1 quarter, and we'll hold this recurring meeting for 1 quarter. It could be 6 weeks, it could be 2 months. But what we're going to make sure that we do is, after that quarter, we're going to come back and say, we've had this recurring meeting every Wednesday at 9:00. How is this meeting going? What's going well? What's not going well? What do we want to change about it? And do we need to continue holding this meeting, or does this need to move to something else? And the way that you make sure you do that is, when you go into scheduling your events, you make sure you put an end date that matches that. And that when you start that meeting, you're just really clear of, we're going to revisit the purpose of this after 1 quarter, or we're going to revisit the purpose of this after 2 months. After 6 months, perhaps. You choose whatever the timeline feels right. But by revisiting meetings that are sort of recurring or set on our schedule, it allows us to make sure that we are growing as the purpose grows, or as the group grows and changes, to make sure that our meetings aren't just becoming a habit. They aren't just becoming something we do just to do them. I believe that meetings can be a great way for groups to create really meaningful culture changes in their organization. It is such a powerful tool that we have, and that we actually have influence over. And so I hope you take this invitation from the Three of Cups and from Temperance, and both of these book resources, and many other, there's lots of other books around meeting, and utilize them to really create a healthy meeting culture in your own group or organization. I hope this has been meaningful for you. If you have a great book around meeting culture, facilitation strategies, please drop those in the comments, because I bet other people would love to be able to grow from you and learn from the resources that others are using out there. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.